Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to this evening's shiur, which is Parshas Re'eh. So I'm traveling, so the inyanim will be perhaps not as intense, but still we have a nice variety of inyanim to address today. So number one, when a person has added a name, is there need to update the Kesuba? Now, people add a name sometimes for health reasons. There's also because of the issue of not having a son-in-law and father-in-law, or mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law having the same name. So many people, for that reason, to be able to make a shidduch, they'll add a name. And so now in Lubavitch, there's many people called Meir Menachem Mendel, Hayom Menachem Mendel, and so on. So do you need to rewrite the Kesuba? Now, there are two. There's a standard Kesuba. There's two other forms for the Kesuba. One is called Kesuba de Irkasa. One is called Kesuba de Ishtakach Botausa. If a person had lost the Kesuba, if a woman had lost the Kesuba, then to replace the lost one. So the nusach that we had a Kesuba and it got lost. We have another that the Kesuba happened to be reviewed and it was seen that there was a mistake in the Kesuba. So that's called the Kesuba de Ishtakach Botausa. So that's going to be reflected in the nusach of the Kesuba. Here, we do not have a standard form. Oh, well, really, the Kesuba was perfectly kosher. But because of a change of the name, therefore, we want to do a new Kesuba. We don't have a traditional nusach for that change of a Kesuba. So start inventing a new nusach. So here you have on the screen from the Minchas Yitzchok. He was in Manchester, later in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. Rav Weiss. So he does recommend to change the Kesuba, to update the Kesuba. But then later on he says, Ha'olam noidniz haru boseh. It's not generally the Olam are not so particular about this. And he says a limud zchus, because having the Kesuba with the old name is not as if you are married without having a valid Kesuba. Because the main thing is that the Kesuba has to be enforceable. If it's not enforceable, then it's meaningless. But if it's enforceable, so it's valid. So all right. So today is called Hayom Yom, but it's not going to be so difficult to find witnesses to say, yeah, Meir Menachem Mendel, but when he got married, he was Menachem Mendel. So you can't just say, dismiss it. Oh, it's not a genuine document. It's not been too difficult to enforce it. And on that basis, he supports the Minhag Olam not to start updating the Kesuba because of an added name. And as I say, it's a little bit not so straightforward to do this, and it's not so widely done. Right. The next thing is, someone asked me, I don't have a slide for this. There was a family, a couple. He was married before, she was married before, and now they're getting engaged. And at the engagement party, so his parents are already passed away. Yeah. Her mother is so frail that she's not able to even to break a plate. So how important is it to break a plate? So in my mind, as I say, I'm traveling, I have a list from Rabbi Chaikin from Cleveland, so sein gesund, of the differences of a wedding for a second versus zivug sheni for second wedding. I have a vague recollection that you don't break a plate altogether, but I don't have it in front of me. But I just to say the following, that generally there's an approach that for zivug sheni, it's a downplayed celebration. And they play on the idea that the first luchos, which given with the whole with the whole fanfare, and they didn't last. The second luchas, which were given discreetly, they lasted. So there's this idea of a second wedding is a dafka, the choice is to make a dafka on the low key. This may be also the reason why it's not done in the open air. It's done indoors, not in a shul. There's a separate inyan that by Charedi Shiurim we don't make a wedding inside a shul because that's copying what lahavdil other faiths that they take their vows before the altar, etc. So we don't do a wedding in a shul, whereas there are for sure we know there are many communities who do. There's something that's discussed in Stei Chemed, but make the wedding indoors. So again, because of less publicity. Also, some say not to have musical instruments at the wedding. That's a difficult thing to sell nowadays, but fine. But possibly, what's the reason of breaking a plate? So the way it appears in Poskim, it's the announcement. The smashing of a plate, which makes a big noise, that is like to announce that there's been a shidduch has been confirmed. So possibly for that very reason, it may be that for a zivuk sheni, there's no need for that to keep it a bit quieter. Just one more point about this. There is a well-known vort, which again I didn't trace now. Why is it by a vort we break a plate, and by chasana you break a glass? The answer is that there's a commitment of a vort, there's a commitment of a chasana. Glass, if it's broken, it can be remolten and reformed. Clay, if it gets broken, it's irreparable. And so the commitment which is made under a chuppah is a commitment which there is, if it doesn't work out, al pi Torah, there's something called a get. So it is like glass, which is whatever the commitment is, it's reversible. Whereas when you give your word, if it's you to unilaterally step away from it, that's not okay, and that's the idea of klicheres, that it's once you've given your word, you can't change it. Okay, but that's a side issue. The main thing is that there is grounds to say that it's not necessary to break a plate. Number one, and number two, that's what you're saying about who breaks the plate. Is lav dafka the mothers who have to break the plate. It can be other people also. It can be krovim. Have cases where there's no parents there, so someone else breaks a plate. The main thing is the breaking of the plate. As I say, it's an announcement of what's going on. That there's been a new shidduch. Right. Let's go on to the Hayom Yom, question number 3. So Hayom Yom of Yutes Elul goes through the seder of when people who wear 4 pairs of tefillin. It says that the rashis are worn from Hayom Yom, from before Hayom Yom all the way till Ach Tzadikim, and then you switch the shalosh and you'd say Tehillim in the Shimosh Rabbah, the shalosh, and then put on Rabenu Tam's, and then you say after Shema and Kadosh Vayikiviyachol, Perek Mishnayos, and then switch shalosh for Ravid, and then to do a Pasha Chumash. Each one, Shema Yisrael said in each one, but the question which I was asked, is there a deeper significance to the choice of a Perek Mishnayos dafke in Rabenu Tam and the other inyonim in the respective tefillin? So I did not have a deeper reason. On a simple level, there is the inyan, but let's take a look at Rashi's. Is the main tefillin, and following on is Tehillim, which is a hemshot to tefillah. Therefore, for Noshim Kerakenu, we say the Tehillim also in Rashi's. And then we have the next thing is Rabenu Tam's. Again, Noshim Kerakenu, we taught on Rabenu Tam's. There is an inyan of learning something. in Rabenu Tam Tefilin, particularly learning Indian of Halochos, of Mishnayos, as we'll see in a moment. And therefore, that's the Rabenu Tam to learn something, Dafke in Tefilin, the Rabenu Tam, and the choice of Mishnayos, we'll see in a moment. And then we have after that the Parsha Chumash, which I don't really have an explanation where it comes into the regular schedule. I remember years ago hearing from Ben Siyam Shem Tov Alav Shalom, what is the time of the day you should be saying Parsha Chumash? Tanya you usually do before davening, Tilim is after davening. When do you say Chumash? So he said, whenever you get a few minutes available, you have a Chumash handy, you do Chumash as soon as possible. That was his. All right. So now on the screen we have, on the left of the screen, we have the Kaf HaChaim from Rabbi Chaim Falaji and comments from the Rebbe Rashab. We mentioned this before, and so we're going to be looking at this entry. So Rabbi Chaim Falaji writes, Oma Toiv, how good would it be to learn something after davening, even if you're finished the Tikkun Hayom, the regular daily schedule. I'm not sure what he means by that. Then he says, and here, Shaloi Lishmo, the fact that other people will see, don't worry about other people will see, and they might think that you're more frum than them. Don't worry about that. And he quotes the Lashon, Loi b'chipozo into itseyu, don't rush out of shul. Now then he says, he quotes from a Sefer Pesach Hadvir, in chapter Chofei, and he says about a chazin, Oy toshev b'tira l'harav oy hayoshar. He says, one who does not put on tefillin be'esek ha-Torah, harehu menuda l'shamayim. The importance of learning Torah while wearing tefillin. Okay, that is Reb Chaim Falaji's comment. And then we have what's more relevant to ourselves is the comment of the Rebbe Rashab. And it's so interesting because these comments don't come across as corrections on the Chaf HaChaim. Sometimes they seem to be just, he wrote down a message which he wanted to give over, although we just kept in this volume for over a century. First thing, he corroborates this idea that after davening in shul, you should learn something. And he doesn't give a source for this, but we know it's written in Shulchan Aruch, the union of Meilcho Michael El Choyel, in Beis HaKnesses, the Beis HaMedrash, that after davening you should learn something. Number one. So to learn something after davening. Ma toiv b'tefillin. Second point is that this learning after davening is recommended to be in tefillin. To be sheyiskayim etzli ha'yis'eirus shebetfilah al kol hayom. That the inspiration and the uplift which you had in davening, this should be now extended to the whole day. And by learning some Torah, wearing tefillin, that seems to be effective in this bridging from the inspiration of davening to the rest of the day. And the third thing he says, v'toiv lilmod mishnayos. And so learning after davening, number one, not in shul. Number two, learning after davening in tefillin. And third thing, learning mishnayos after davening. V'gam yodua tefillah is rotze and Torah is shuv. And rotz libcho shuv, you had the inspiration of davening, and now you learn something. It's like bringing inspiration down to earth. So this is where we're seeing that the Rebbe Rashab is not talking about Rabenu Tam specifically. He is saying, however, there's a mile learning and in tefillin, and particularly to learn Mishnayos. And then on the screen you also have the comments of the publisher, of the editor, and he brings the idea of kol hashoyne halochos b'chol yoyim, one who learns haloch every day. Halochos every day is assured to be a ben olam habo, and he quotes from the other Kaf HaChaim to say that there is an emphasis particularly to halachos, and by learning Mishnayos you mekayim this inyan. And then he has here how Mishna is Osis Neshama. And so by learning Mishnayos, it breaks the clipper and it maybe allows the neshama to shine. And this will be the bridge to take the inspiration of tefillah for the whole day. Okay, so what we're seeing here is there is a particular mile limit Mishnayos after davening, and particularly in tefillin. And so, all right, so it's put together with the Rabenu Tam. I've never noticed this before. Sometimes people ask, is it important to learn to say Tehillim, the daily Tehillim, whilst wearing your tefillin, or can you take off your tefillin before? So possibly the fact that it says here that the tefillin in the Hayom Yom, that the Tehillim should be said with Shimush Rabo, perhaps tells us it should be said in tefillin. And if you're not wearing Shimush Rabo, so perhaps it should be said with the Rashi's tefillin. Right. In other words, well, I'm taking the liberty of saying that the messages, people ask, why did the Rebbe see the need to include in Hayom Yom the order for those who wear 4 pairs of tefillin? Since it's not Shavah L'chol Nefesh, it's only Yechidei Sgula, so why do you give it? So I'm saying you look at this and you can say, all right, I'm not wearing 4 pairs of tefillin, but I can apply some of it in my own Seder HaAveda. We go on to the next point, and that is about does a married man recite a brocho each morning for the Tallis-Koton? So one of our dedicated listeners is Davos Nusach Ashkenaz. He says, not only married men wear talesim, in Ashkenaz minhag, even a bocher will wear a talis, and even a young boy under bar mitzvah will also wear a talis. Yeah? So true. So my apologies. The question is true for married or not married. The question is, we have a brocho when we put on our talis in the morning. We say the brocho lis'atev b'tzitzis, to enwrap ourselves with tzitzis. And then we have a brocho for the Tallis-Koton, which we don't wrap ourselves with, we just put it on. And there's a nusach brocho al mitzvahs tzitzis. And the question is, the same person who at 7 o'clock or 6:30 is going to put on a Tallis-Koton, and at 9 o'clock is going to put in the Tallis Goggle, does he say 2 brochos, one at 7 o'clock and one at 9 o'clock? Or does he just wait around with the brocho of Tallis-Koton and incorporate it with the brocho on the Tallis Goggle? Now, let's first read. Again, we have here a piece from Reb Chaim Falaji and a comment of the Rebbe Rashab, which is very, very interesting. So first of all, the idea of wearing a Tallis-Koton anytime. It says even during Tashmish to wear the Tallis-Koton, and that was the minhag of the Arizal. Then he says, when you change your Tallis-Koton every Friday, Kadar koi shemachlif arbo bigdei lovon. Talks about on Friday you should change the 4 white garments. He's obviously borrowing from the idea that the Kohanim had yoitim, wore 4 garments, and they were made of linen. Although the gartels and machloikas, all right, and the Kohen Gadol wore all 4 of linen. So this idea of Shabbos changing into fresh clothing. So the Tallis-Koton should also be changed. Of course, Tallis-Koton is not linen; it's made of wool. Fine. So when you change your on Friday, and I'm sure I've said this before, but it perhaps deserves to be repeated, that people know that for Shabbos you have dedicated Shabbos clothes. People also know that for Shabbos, your underwear, etc., you put on fresh, not necessarily dedicated for Shabbos, but clean clothing, clean shirt, lavdafka dedicated for Shabbos. You put on a clean shirt with covered Shabbos. The Tallis-Koton, what about that? Does it have to be a different one? Does it have to be? So Pashas, it should be either dedicated to Shabbos, so you have a different one dedicated to Shabbos. If that's not so practical, at least it has to be a clean one. It doesn't make sense that all the other clothes are clean and dedicated to Shabbos, and the Tallis-Koton is having the same sweat which you've had for the last 3 months. Doesn't make sense at all. So here you see that the Kaf HaChaim is saying before Shabbos, When you get dressed for Shabbos, you change to a different Tallis-Koton. So now when your hands are clean, so he says, if your hands are clean at the time when you put in Tallis-Koton, you make your brocho there. If your hands are not clean, in other words, at the time you put on Tallis-Koton, it's not practical to make a brocha. So then, after you wash your hands, you'll touch the tzitzis with your hands, and you'll make a brocha afterwards. So that's on a Friday. Then he says, if you wear a Tallis-Koton and you take it off and you switch it, put it back on again shortly thereafter, you don't make a new brocha because it was such a short interval. However, he says, if you go into the Beis HaMerchatz, you went to the bathhouse, and then the interval between taking off and putting on is a hefsek merubah, is a long interval, then you should make a new brocha when you go out of the mikveh. And he gives references to there for this. He gives a reference to Magen Avram, and Rabo, and Derech Chaim that's the Siddur Derech Chaim from Agoin Melissa. So this is all what's written in the Kaf HaChaim from Reb Chaim Falachi. But then the Rebbe Rashab's comments are very, very interesting. He writes, B'chol boiker, every morning, Yochel livdok tzitzios ha-Tallis-Koton ulevorech olav af sheyoshen bo. He doesn't have to wait once a week. He comes with a chiddush even every morning. And even if it's the same Tallis-Koton you wore through the night, in the morning you make a new brocha. Very, very interesting. Then he writes, during the Alter Rebbe Siddur Kosav, that if you put on your Tallis-Koton before daybreak, and you can't make a brocha then, so then when you put on your Talis Godel, later on you'll have in mind the Tallis-Koton. You won't make a separate brocha. Then he goes into the whole thing, whether you can reconcile one with the other. So it looks like the Alter Rebbe is saying, if you put on a Tallis-Koton before daybreak, you won't make a brocha on it. You'll wait to make a brocha on the Talis Godel. Here the Rebbe is saying that you can make a brocha on Tallis-Koton as soon as when you wake up. You don't have to, not even if you switched it, which is very interesting. We're going to now read carefully the Hayom Yom, which to my mind is clearly not like the minhag which the Rebbe Rashab writes. As you can see the last line, he writes, my impression is that we follow this minhag, that every morning you can check your tzitzis and make a broch on your Tallis-Koton, the same which you slept through the night. And I'm going to say that we're not noeg like that. We do have some details where Rabbi Chadakov, Alav Shalom, before he got married, he went to the Frierdiker Rebbe for guidance, and he was told this idea of not making brocha on Tallis-Koton, etc. Now, let's take a look now at the Hayom Yom, and let's read that carefully. Belvishas, if you dalad sivan. Belvishas Tallis-Koton babeker, b'yodayim nikiyas. If you put on your Tallis-Koton in the morning, so you're putting on a new one, yeah? It's not the one which you slept with. In Levishas Tallis-Koton, you're putting on a Tallis-Koton, and your hands are clean. Not only hands are clean, it's also the location where you're doing so. You're allowed to make a brocha. Mevorchim al mitzvahs tzitzis. So you should make a brocha upon putting on the Tallis-Koton, providing that the room and yourself are able to make a brocha. Why do you make the brocha al mitzvahs tzitzis? Why not lihis ativ b'tzitzis? And he adds, Kiven she'ein b'Tallis-Koton shelonu shiur ituf. Our Tallis-Koton is not large enough to wrap around. You have to be mekayim mitzvahs tzitzis. You have to have an armor in the front, an armor in the back. If you're going to put it on your head, so half your tzitzis, half your beggar has been taken up with covering the head. You're not going to have an armor for the back or for the front, etc. So, therefore, so say the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur says, you want to make a brocha on Tallis-Koton, do atifa. So it could be that in the Alter Rebbe's times, it was common to have a much larger Tallis-Koton. Could be. Could be they took an old talus and cut it in half and made it into two Tallisim Ktanim. That could be. And perhaps then you would have a shiur ituf, and that's what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. But here, in the Hayom Yom, he says, our Tallisim Ktanim are not large enough to do atifah, and therefore, less bereda, we say the brocho al mitzvahs tzitzis. Now, let me just perhaps clarify that the brocho lisativ tzitzis is written in the Gemara. The brocho al mitzvahs tzitzis is not written in the Gemara. There's a discussion in Poskim whether the lisativ, whether the wrapping around is imperative for the mitzvah of tzitzis. Because after all, the Torah says, Ashat chasabo, bigdeichem, it doesn't say lisativ. This is in the Gemara, has the lotion of lisativ. But why should that be, why should you not fulfill the mitzvah if you're not misativ? So this is the machlokas poskim. So let's say we'll follow their view that you are makayim mitzvah tzitzis even without atifah. But then the brocho is just it jars. How can you say lisativ and you're not doing so? And hence they have this creation of an alternative nusach al mitzvah tzitzis. And the Alter Rebbe in his siddur does not bring this nusach brocho of al mitzvah tzitzis because he's not happy to say a brocho, which just doesn't have a source in the Gemara. And despite that, despite the Alter Rebbe in the siddur, he does mention it. In the siddur, he doesn't mention it. But then the Hayom Yom is confirming, despite those reservations, we do say the brocho al mitzvah tzitzis if necessary, because you cannot say lisati. But meanwhile, he said that a person who gets up early, gets up in the morning, and he's going to be able to put on his Tallis-Koton, and he's able to say a brocho then. 2 hours later, you put on a talus, doesn't matter. Now you're doing a mitzvah, and you can make a brocho as you're doing the mitzvah, so do so. Despite the reservations about the nusach brocho. But that is, I must say, largely irrelevant. Because most of us, when we get up in the morning, wash nagavasa, then use the bathroom, brush your teeth, get dressed, and when you're getting dressed, you've just touched parts of your body with which warrant you have to wash your hands. You can't make a brocho then. So most of the time, most of us, when we're putting on our Tallis-Koton, especially if you put under your shirt, not rather over your shirt, when you're putting your Tallis-Koton, you cannot make a brocho because your hands are soiled. As a result, we go into the second category. Im osu levorech. If you are not able to say a brocho when you put in Tallis-Koton, then we have koidem atfilah. Before davening, if you're not wearing a Tallis-Koton, you mashmish b'dal tzitziyosov, you touch the 4 tzitzis, and you make a brocho then. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that by and large, people who are a bocher, if he puts in his tzitzis in the morning, a fresh pair, and he doesn't say a brocho then, he'll wait till koidem atfilah, which is a mystery. Why does he have to wait till then? Why can't he say it right away? I don't know. Perhaps it's because if he goes to mikvah and he comes out, they're going to be a child, make another brocha actually because of that. Could be. But for the ingerman, for a married man, so then he didn't say a brocha in the morning because he wasn't able to make a brocha. He's a mocking also levarich. And then he might see the Tallis-Koton with the brocha of the Tallis-Koton. So we've got here the Rebbe Rashab is talking about making a brocha on the Tallis-Koton when you woke up, even if you didn't change it. And we're going from one down to the other extreme. Dafki if you changed it. And even then, we're not rushing to say the brocha al mitzvah tzitzis unless you mamish and the brocha the mitzvah then. You say the brocha right when you put it on. Otherwise, the brocha al mitzvah tzitzis is dropped until you just cover it with the Tallis-Koton. So personally, I don't say the brocha al mitzvah tzitzis on a regular basis, other than a Friday afternoon. I change them to a different Tallis-Koton, the covered Shabbos. That's when I'll say the brocha al mitzvah tzitzis because I'm not intending to put on a Tallis-Koton. Incidentally, on Erev Yom Kippur, I would not say the brocha al mitzvah tzitzis because I have ahead of me. I'm going to put on the talis before Kol Nidre with the brocha, and I have in mind that it's the Tallis-Koton. Just by the way, you can also throw in that when you make your brocho in your Tallis-Koton and you beidik the tzitzis, you should also be beidik the tzitzis of the Tallis-Koton, because after all, your brocho is going to for the on the Tallis-Koton as well as the Tallis-Koton. Okay, that is as much we're going to cover about this point, and let's move on. So number 4 was what brocho should be said on ice cream, which contains pieces of biscuit. It's apparently quite a popular product, and it's gotten into, there's a sefer Shari HaBrocha, a very contemporary sefer, brochos on food, and he says make 2 brochos for the simple reason we have a general principle that eating grain is not considered subsidiary to other foods in the same combination, unless it's there just to hold it together. But if it's there to eat it as a biscuit, to give that crunchy flavor, it's a mezainis. On the other hand, to say, oh, the whole ice cream has become mezainis because there's a few bits of biscuits, that also doesn't make sense. And therefore, we have the recommendation to make 2 brachas. And the same thing would be if you have ice cream in a cornet. So the cornet is mezainis, the cone, whatever you call it, and that ice cream is shahakal. And to say mezainis and the whole thing doesn't make sense. On the other hand, you cannot ignore the cone, the mezainis cone, especially if it's got a taste to it, so a bit sugary. So the poil, you make 1 bracha on the mezainis, then a bracha on of shahakal on the ice cream. It comes to boyer nefoshes. It's unlikely that you'll have a kazayas of biscuit within a reasonable amount of time, and therefore it's just boyer nefoshes. And that is true whether it's ice cream in a cone or bits of biscuit inside an ice cream. You don't need to make al hamichya on the biscuit part because it's tougher to the because you don't have a shiur. So yeah. All right, that was about the ice cream. Let's now go on to. Did I miss out something? No, did that? The numbers is incorrect here. This should be number. No, that's correct. 5, 6. Okay. So here's a question about calling up to the Torah a man who's wearing short trousers, and the shliach tells me that generally he's avoided doing so. So what you have on the screen here is from the Piskei Teshuvos, from Hilchos Tefillah, and talking about standing in Shmona Esrei, to stand in a respectful way, Oimid Lifnei HaMelech. Then he says, so all right, in our society, you would, in presence of Anoshim Chashuvim, you'd wear a suit, you'd wear a jacket, and all right, a hat in the Goyish society now is no longer a choshev thing to do, but Bayas, the hat is also part of it. But there are elements in society from Yidden, I'm sure Shabbos, but by them is a shirt and a kippah, pasruga. But then then there'd be oimid lifnei hamelech in that way also in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very popular level of dress. So for them, it's not such a problem to daven Shemona Esrei in that way. And then what about davening without wearing socks? So if it's a place where people go around barefoot or with open sandals without socks, so then again also that would be okay. But then he says, also short sleeves and short trousers, zulas kesheligoshim lefnei ha'amud keshliach tzibur, with the exception when this person is going to be a chazan, shetzrichim leisatef gehoigen. As a chazan, they should be dressed more properly. So in the Welt, a chazan wears a tallis. So in a Chabad shul, where we're not insisting on a tallis for chazan, but if a person's wearing short sleeves, perhaps he should be encouraged to wear a tallis instead. als Kavod Tzibur. Then he says, V'chein bal yosem l'Torah. Also, when having Aliya l'Torah, so the short sleeves and short trousers, whilst for the person's own tefillah, it seems to be acceptable, and even though it's considered omid lifnei hamelech, and that's good enough, and yet I'm not totally sure why, but when it is to stand in front of the tzibur, then there's expectation that it should be dressed better, and as a result, he's discouraging giving an Aliya to someone who's wearing short sleeves or wearing short trousers. Again, this might change according to the norm in that part of the world. But, okay. And, it's for a person wearing short sleeves, it's not such a big deal to give them something to wear, a jacket or a tallis. What you're going to do is wearing short trousers. What are you going to do? Give them a pair of trousers. It's going to be it's a difficult one to follow up. Right. Let's move on. So now, I think last week we had a discussion about Shnayim Mikro. I went to do the Mavasedra that came up, and in passing, I had mentioned how personally I do Mavasedra on Shabbos morning, and so someone sent me this clip from a letter of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe says the mitzvah is to be Mavasedra on Friday, and only by oinus oisen zeh Shabbos. And if you didn't manage on Friday, then you do it on Shabbos. Fair enough. My dilemma is the following: that on Friday there is a ma'ila to say Mavasedra without an interruption. And on Friday, it's the busiest time for people asking shilas. So here's my dilemma: to say on Friday and anticipate to be interrupted, or to say it on Shabbos, which is not the right time, it's later than the right time, but which will be without interruptions. So this is my dilemma. Okay. What do we have here? This is from Simaresh Pei, that there's one opinion which says to do Mavasedra Erev Shabbos after Chatzos. There's another opinion to say Erev Shabbos right after Shacharis. Now then he adds, V'shaloi lahafsik klal be'emsa. And it's the way it's presented, it seems to be as if this kpeda, not to interrupt in middle, is connected to the minhag of saying Mavasedra in the morning rather than in the afternoon of Friday, which I don't see a connection. This one is about the timing, this yesh noegin, and then v'shaloi lahafsik, that seems should be according to both of them. But the wording is a bit confusing to myself. Okay, let's go on to the next point, and that is about a kadeshim. So, a person who's in the year of Avelos, one litzlan, or a parent, will say Kaddish every day, and if he's able to, he davens at the Yomid. And by doing so, he's able to accrue a number of 16 Kadeshim. And what's the significance of saying Kaddish 16 times? So there's a basis on the Zohar that a Kaddish brings a relief, a respite for Neshama in the Olam HaEmes, gives a respite for an hour and a half. And since there are 24 hours in a day, so 16 Kadeshim gives 24 hours of respite. That's the cheshbon. Now you can see I made the effort of listing all the Kadeshim according to the Seder HaTfilah Hanog B'Chabad nowadays. As you can see, with 3 times saying Mishnayos after davening, you have 18 Kadeshim. You could say that our Seder was before they introduced the Indian of saying Tehillim every day. So there would have been 17 Kadeshim. Here's the question: why if there are you already have 16 Kadeshim, why are you still saying Mishnayos and a Kaddish D'Rabbanon after each of the 3 tefillahs? And in addition to these 18, on a day of Monday and Thursday, when there's Kriyas HaTorah, there's an extra Kaddish. So you have 19 Kaddishim. So why is the oval still mishtadel to say Kaddish D'Rabbanan, to say Mishnayos and Kaddish D'Rabbanan, when the quota of Kaddishim he has, if he downloads the Yom all three tefillas, he has the quota of Kaddishim of 16 Kaddishim anyways? That was the question. Yeah. So someone was one of these WhatsApp groups. Someone had said he had heard that there's a diuk not to say more than 16 Kaddishim. So good news is that there's a Mefurish Sikh of the Rebbe to the contrary. When it comes to the number of Kaddishim, there's not a problem to be moisif on the 16 Kaddishim. It's just not to have less than the 16 Kaddishim. And you can quote the Zohar about the hour and a half. Okay. So having more is not a problem, but still that doesn't answer. It's not a problem, but why are you making an emphasis of Dafka, saying Mishnayos and adding Kaddish? And just to understand one point, that when there is no chiyuv, say Kaddish, then we don't have Mishnayos after Daphne. It's not like the Kaddish after other parts. Tzibur say a thing, and then you say a Kaddish after, but the Kaddish after Mishnayos is only there to enable the oval to say an extra Kaddish. So here's the question: he's already got his 60 Kaddishim. Why is he saying Mishnayos again and again after each tefillah when you could really have dispensed with that? So that was the dilemma. That was the question. So what I'm suggesting, a chiddush, is the following: you're looking Kisvi Arizal, and you can see here. This is from the Kaf HaChaim. This Kaf HaChaim, I think, is Siman Nun Hey. So Kaf HaChaim generally brings things from the Arizal, and the Arizal would refer to the Kaddish, the Rabbanon, as Kaddish D'Yasme. The Kaddish said after Kaveh, after Peter Maktoires, that's the Kaddish of the orphans. Now, that is because according to the Sfardim, it's not a standard thing to say Kaddish after Olein. So which is the last Kaddish? So the last Kaddish is the Kaddish after Ein Kelekenu, after Peter Maktoires. That being the Kaddish Basra. So it's known as the Kaddish D'Yasmin. It's interesting, the Sfardim, the Kaddish after Shir Shal Yoim, they don't call it the Kaddish Yosem. They called it Kaddish Yehei Shlomo. Kaddish Rabbanon after Peter Maktoires is called Kaddish D'Yasmin, the orphans Kaddish. So here we have an interesting thing. Ashkenazim, we do say Oleinu and the Kaddish after. Sabeos the Kaddish Basra is the one after Oleinu. But the Arizal said that the Kaddish Rabbanon is a Kaddish D'Yasmin. So in order to fulfill this idea that the last Kaddish should be a Kaddish Rabbanon and it's a Kaddish D'Yasmin, therefore, Dafka to say again, further Mishnayos, in addition to the Omer Rebbe Lozer, Chanina, etc., with the Peter Maktoires, to say after the whole davening is over, to say again Mishnayos, and then to say a Kaddish Rabbanon, that becomes Taka the Kaddish Basra, and it's Kaddish D'Yasmin, it's Kaddish Rabbanon. So I'm just suggesting that the reason for saying the extra Kaddish with Mishnayos and Kaddish is to be able to have that the Kaddish Basra should Taka be a Kaddish D'Rabbanan. If someone has a better explanation, I'll be very happy to share it with the tzibur in the future. Okay, we're going on to our next question, and that is, someone writes to me, he went to the Yomid, by the oil or something. People are davening, he needed someone to go to the Yomid, he got to the Yomid. So he finishes off Rabbi Yishmael, David Laman Sefer, and then you're Yotzid, and he starts Kaddish. But then, as he starts Kaddish, there's someone who starts saying, oh, he's Kaddish. So it's someone who is present, is saying Kaddish. Many people say Kaddish for a relative or someone else who there's no relative is saying Kaddish. So he jumps in and says Kaddish. Oh, if you're saying Kaddish, I don't need to say Kaddish. The Chazan Doesn't need to say Kaddish before I do. If someone else is saying Kaddish, it's optional. So he stepped back. You're saying Kaddish, I don't have to say it. So this is a question. When someone started saying Kaddish, thinking there's no one else saying, and then someone else starts saying, is it okay to stop short? Well, you started, you have to finish. This is the question. So I looked around and I didn't find this question addressed clearly. It's not limited to Chabad, it can be in other circles also. You started Kaddish, and then someone else started saying Kaddish. Are you allowed to stop? So here we have a story which is printed in Sefer HaMinhagim. It was once on a Monday or a Thursday. It was the year where the Rebbe Rashab was in Avelus after his mother. When did the Rebbe Rashab's mother pass away? I don't remember now. Okay, so that was the Rebbe Serifka, I believe. So after he was in the year of Avelus after his mother's passing, so the Rebbe Rashab moved from his place to go to the Bima to say Kaddish after Kriyas Torah. By the way, it's interesting. Many Avelim make a point of getting every Monday and Thursday, getting the third Aliya. The Rebbe Rashab apparently wasn't there. He was standing by his place. Said came Kaddish. So he walks over from his place towards the Bima to say Kaddish. Meanwhile, someone else had started saying Kaddish. He didn't realize that the Rebbe is saying Kaddish today by the Bima. But when he saw that the Rebbe is coming over to the Bima, so he stepped back. So in the middle of Kaddish, he stepped back. Rebbe Rashab told him, he motioned to him to stay here. The Rebbe said Kaddish, and then he told him, you also now say Kaddish. So what I'm seeing from this story is the fact that he stopped in the middle of Kaddish doesn't seem to be such a terrible thing. Otherwise, why would they say Lashon Hora about him? All right, so it was okay for him to stop, and the Rebbe Rashab would say the Kaddish. The Rebbe Rashab, nevertheless, did encourage him to say another Kaddish, to say the Kaddish again. And we've gone through this in the past, where here there's a difference between the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim. The Ashkenazim see the Kaddish after Kriyas HaTorah as it's primarily the prerogative of the Baal Koireh. If the Baal Koireh is a nice fellow, he'll allow someone else to say it. Whereas by the Sfardim, it's the Chatzchila seen as a Kaddish for the Yosoimim, like you have a Kaddish after Sheshoyim, etc. There's also a Kaddish after Kriyas HaTorah, and as a result, by the Sfardim, it's accepted that there can be several Avelim, Rahman al-Islam, saying that Kaddish after Kriyas HaTorah, which also has a bearing. I was Shabbos, I was in Gan Yisrael, and there was a boy, a 10-year-old boy, whose father passed away about a month ago, and he was saying Kaddish. So the Kaddish, after Kriyas HaTorah, they told him to say this Kaddish. And this is really dependent on this machlokas between the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim. Is this Kaddish a Kaddish, a voluntary Kaddish, so to speak, which is a Kaddish Yosem, or is it part of, say, that Tefillah, Dafka should be an adult? It may be contingent about machlokas, but I told one of the organizers that Kaddish is shouldn't be given to an under bar mitzvah. It should be said either by the Baal Koireh or by someone who's over bar mitzvah. Let's move on. What do we have now? About clearing up after the Kiddush. So someone asked, last week we had this thing about the ladies' auxiliary. They want to tidy up after the Kiddush and wash the dishes because they are anti-disposables. And so it's a whole avodah of washing the dishes and putting dry cleaning, whether they could do that on Shabbos after the Kiddush. And we said that doesn't seem to be okay. Actually, in Shul here, I picked up a sefer called Migdal Tzoifim from Rav Gedalia Axelrod, Rov in Haifa. And he had a similar shaila about a Shabbos afternoon club, Misiba Shabbos, and they use a classroom. They come to the classroom, and the chairs are on top of the tables, as is very common in schools. At the end of the day, the children put the chairs on top of the desks. Then the cleaner is able to clean the floor without any, with less interference. So the kids come into the classroom, they take the chairs off to sit down on them in this classroom. When they finish, can they put the chairs back on the tables to leave the room the way they left it? So that he says that's okay, because it's not a tircha gdoila, it's leave the room where you left it. Whereas our problem, as we discussed last week, was much more washing up the dishes, etc., is much more of a job, which I felt wouldn't be appropriate to be done on Shabbos. So then someone writes to me, what in his shul, it doesn't say where he is, and doesn't matter. Now they have a goy coming in the afternoon, and the guy is cleaning up after the kiddush, and he's washing the floor, and he's vacuuming, etc. So is that the same thing? So my response to him, there's no Mara Mekomis on this, because I didn't have a chance to look it up properly, but generally, with a goy, there is an approach that if you give the goy a job to do, and he can do it in b'derech heter, and he chooses to do it b'derech isur, that's okay. Now, generally, that's so. Here, you tell the guy, by Sunday morning, I need this room cleared, and the guy says, why should I come at 11 o'clock at night? I can do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the fact that the guy has chosen to tidy up this place on Shabbos rather than after Shabbos is really the guy is doing it for their own convenience. That makes it easier. The washing of the floor, okay, so if you needed it for Shabbos, that might be more of a question. But the washing of the floor is more of a melacha, a chashash melacha. Using a vacuum cleaner, I wouldn't think it's right to have the guy doing the vacuum cleaner whilst people are present. It's a chilul Hashem. Now, there's a difference also whether it's on premises, off premises, but when it's just a question of a hachona, not a question of melacha, one can be more mekel that the goy should be able to get on with it. As I say, they're doing it primarily for their own. They're doing it now to make life easier for themselves, not doing it for you. Our last thing which we have today is someone sent me the following. In the Sefer Nesivim Mishtach Shlichus, the second volume. So I have there a question about at what age should we know we don't listen. Men shouldn't be listening to females singing. From what age is considered a female for singing, and they shouldn't be hearing their singing? So there are different opinions about this. And so I wrote here that some say from 3 years old, some say from 6, and some say from 11. Up till 11, it's an hour. So these are not Chabad poskim, these are general poskim. But the one who says the age of 3 is Reb Shlomo Zalman. Quoted, okay. And then I have here a quote from the Likutei Sichos Chelik Yud Ches. And so this is what we're looking at. The line in the Likutei Sichos Yud Ches says the following: according to Shulchan Aruch, from the age of 3 and up, the girl should be behaving in a tznius way, and how much more if she's 10 years old, etc. But not to be heavy-handed and to speak in a pleasant way. This is the Lashon as it is in the Likutei Sichos. Now, my length sentence after that is that the quote here in the Likutei Sichos doesn't tell us what is the tznius issue which is being addressed here. Is it got to do with clothing? Has it got to do with singing or something else? It's not clear. So now someone sent me this morning or yesterday that these few lines in the Likutei Sichos in the back, in the letters, is from an answer to Reb Beryl Baumgarten, although Shalom, was a very Chassidish Yid. Many years he was a shliach in Argentina. My impression is this is before he moved out to Argentina, and he had written to the Rebbe about his children who are in schools in Crown Heights, and is concerned about them learning Limudei Chayil. That's one thing. He says, whatever the Rebbe says, is, then he says about the Indian of getting up dressing. The Rebbe has said not to be heavy-handed on my daughters, and not to behave like the Ungarische. In other words, which for them it's a very strong emphasis. If the Rebbe's guidance of be softer rather than heavy-handed, does that still apply? Because of Shulchan Aruch, he writes, this is Rabbi Baumgartner's right, from the Shulchan Aruch, from 3 years old, she has to behave with its sneers, and how much more if she's 10, etc. And so this, the Rebbe answers, he underlines the words loyla hachbid, not to be heavy-handed, and a dayan betok for imedes, and that guidance still remains, and ledaber b'darkei noyam. So now let's go back to the previous slide. Well, this is where that Loshen Lekutei Sichos is taken from the answer to Rabbi Baumgarten. So what's interesting is the opening part, that the Shulchan Aruch requires from the age of 3 upwards to behave in sneers. That was written actually by Rabbi Baumgarten in his letter. And the Rebbe looks like adopted this. It should become part of the Rebbe's message. But this is so just to finish off. My question was: is this talking about singing or is it talking about clothing? So from the background, we see that it's talking about clothing, and the Rebbe is saying from the age of 3 and onwards, it's the clothing should be b'tznius. And how much more if she's older? Again, that's also from Rabbi Baumgarten's words. And then the Rebbe had said, "Lo lahachbid oil," not to be heavy-handed, and the you saw what that is indicating. Or to speak in a pleasant way, and that's the way you'll get through your message in an effective way. That should be so that's a bit of a birur. So it's very unusual that you have, I don't know how actually, that there's a letter of the Rebbe published in the Lekutei Sichos. Half of that letter is actually the Loshen of the Shoyel. It's not so rare. You have also a similar letter about mezuzah beheket tzir by a side door. And the Rebbe says, the way it's written in the Lekutei Sichos, gam b'pesach tzedodi noyagin lefi heket tzir. And that Loshen is really not the Rebbe's Loshen. It was written by someone called Rabbi Zalmanov, who wrote into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe responded like 1 or 2 words. But that became a hero, taking the wording of the Shoyel, and then the Rebbe's answer, putting it into one thing. And the letters in the back of the Sichos were all Mugger. So therefore, it doesn't matter where it came from. The point is that the Rebbe released it under his name. That there should be an Indian of Hanhoga from Gimel Yom Echad, because we know that he's talking about clothing. And so when it comes to singing, then we have, as I said, we have the various opinions. Shlomo Zalman says the age of 3, and others are a bit more lenient. Okay, that's what I have to share with you. And thank you for joining us. I wish you all a good Shabbos, and enjoy the rest of the summer. The Rikah, it should be zeicher to see Binyan Bayis Hashlishi, Mishmatzich Mashiach Tzidkenu, V'simchas Olam Al Rishon.
Amen.